does it actually mean to be involved in it? What do you basically do, and kind of why did you get involved in the first place?
So to answer either of those questions, you'd have to answer really what the Zeitgeist movement is. It's best to start with the word Zeitgeist, which is a German loanword, meaning literally spirit of the age. And we make the argument, or at least the movement makes the argument, that there is an underlying train of thought within society, no matter what permeations of society we're talking about, that is implicitly unsustainable no matter what you do within that cultural framework, no matter if you follow profit maximization or the ecological standards as they exist today, which are dictated very much by the market and short term. All of those things are out of alignment with what is required of us in order to live successfully on the planet in a really sustainable way. And so to be involved with the Zeitgeist movement is to advocate a certain type of train of thought that is sort of logically self-realizing, that you set in motion a worldview based on understandings of causality, where problems really come from. They don't come from voting for the wrong people. And understanding that the solutions lie in science and technology applied for social concern, and that entails a certain type of society, and very much the society we don't have now. And so based within that very general framework of what our avocations are, you could be involved in public speaking, which is where I've found myself. You could be involved in writing, filmmaking. You could be somebody who is an activist within 3D printing, which seems to be something of an emerging technology that's going to change the way that we live. You could be into music. You could be into anything that informs and reaches out to the zeitgeist as it is now, everything we require and think of as normal now, in order to change that and bring about a more scientific worldview.
Give us a picture of what is the zeitgeist at the moment.
So at the moment, the zeitgeist worldwide really is one locked into very old folkways and mores of how we used to live in the past. We still live in societies where we rely on the opinions of people, whether that be the general population or whether it actually be the people who find themselves in power, rather than on the rapidly emerging scientific understandings that we have, and they're not adopted quick enough. We still very much have a consumption-based society worldwide. We are eating up the planet in phenomenally quick ways. I'll give you two examples of how quickly that's happening, because people get very deadened to the idea that we are destroying the environment because they keep hearing it on the news. And after a while, it means less and less. So recently, in the last couple of weeks, there's been a report that the animal population of all types of animals around the world has dropped by 52% in 40 years. So I am 34 years old. In other words, that happened on my watch. At the same time, we are seeing the kinds of pollution levels from international shipping that equate to a phenomenal amount of car pollution. If you were to count it up, one of those big supertankers that is dragging large amounts of poorly constructed nonsense around the world for us to consume just to keep that GDP up, uses about 50 million cars worth of pollution in 1 year. And there are 10,000 of those last time I checked, which is probably about 2010, so it's higher now. I'll leave the viewers to do the maths on what 50 million times 10,000 is and find out just how much pollution we're producing. It's a phenomenal amount. So here's the problem, however. Our society rewards that kind of behavior. We count as positive increased consumption and do not count environmental waste, human illness as a result, animal destruction as a result, and the general environmental desecration as a result either. Those are all externalized. There's no value ascribed to those. So the value we have at the moment is only tied to consumption and to short-term gain, and there is nothing that you can do within that value system that can reward long-term sustainability or resolution of problems as they really do exist. We're locked in by the rules of the game into being unsustainable. That's the kind of society we have, and that is true of pretty much any society I can think of, certainly all of the Western societies and most of the Eastern ones too. They go under different names, but the underlying market logic, the underlying idea is very much implicitly the same one.
I wonder if you get a lot of questions in interviews that are based along the lines of, so basically how if we want to, generally, we change from the current system that we have, which is putting profits before people and before the planet. How do we change away from that?
There are several different ways of doing it. All of them are probably very frustrating to the people who are asking that question, because they have been conditioned to think that they can vote themselves out of something, or that there's like a button you can push, resource-based economy, go, that kind of thing. The first one, and it's one that is met with a fair amount of criticism, and there are good and bad reasons for it, I would say, is to stop participating in the system you have. Most people seem to already be doing that. Russell Brand was on your show quite recently and has pointed out that something like 2/3, if not 3/4 of people no longer vote. If that is not a sign of the absolute understanding that it's just thoroughly irrelevant as a model for human action, then I don't know what is. I would encourage that people don't vote any further. The second one is probably to get involved with local projects. Even though the Zeitgeist Movement talks about global solutions, we talk about the idea that as a planet we have to align. We have to take in all the information about the planet's biosphere, about the requirements of human life on it and of animal life on it as well. Otherwise you end up not being able to solve a problem unless you have all the information. You can't break out of a solid iron prison with only one locked door if I didn't tell you that there's the key to the door lying at your feet. If you'd not taken that information, you're stuck. So we do talk about those global situations, that global view, the idea of taking a combined networked view of the world into account. But of course, in alongside of that, the whole point of a resilient society is to act locally, to get involved with things like local microgeneration of power, sort of energy, which at the moment, according to the Rocky Mountain Institute from a week ago, is a quarter of the planet's energy is now microgenerated, which is much higher than I think anybody in the audience would think it is. And it gives you an idea of the real undercurrent that there is in localized action. That's a key one, because not only is it very resilient against things like natural disasters. For example, the internet doesn't go down most of the time when we have very, very big tornadoes. In the States, we have hurricanes that don't take it down because it's nodally structured. Same thing needs to happen with not just energy and resource use as well, so that you have local stuff available to you, but also because it needs to happen on a social level as well. I think we do need to get back in touch with our locality, while not losing the view of the sort of the greater picture of the globe, and to see past country divisions. So that can mean things like developing and working with 3D printing people, or with local trading people, even, so that you can do things like job swaps. And then you could also petition the governments, if you want to, on things like, I would say, universal basic income to start with. Even though the Zeitgeist Movement does foresee, through the general trends that are apparent, sort of the ultimate waning of the monetary system as a sort of a relevant arbiter of value. We do in the short term understand that obviously we're stuck with it now, and one of the ways of perhaps addressing the rampant poverty and the deprivation that lead to all of those social ills and crime and mental health issues and even physical health issues, that there needs to be a sort of a reorientation from this, was it 0.01% to the 99.99% as it is, as Lawrence Lessig said. That's got to be addressed in the short term. So you could advocate on that part if you want as well. It's not really our position, or rather I would say my position, because we speak for ourselves individually, to tell you what to do and to tell you what to advocate. And you may disagree with one or all of the things I've just said, but the whole point is, if you understand the underlying train of thought, the idea that we need to have something that has as its first principles the understanding of resource allocation on the planet, the limitations of it, what we can do with new scientific understandings that may completely replace old types of vested interest and established institutions that we hold as being thoroughly normal, as in within that zeitgeist. As long as you understand that, and as long as you can advance your view, taking that into account, the actions that you're going to do, the kind of advocations you will make, the kind of conversations you will have, the kind of people how you will tell this to people, are going to be in line with what we require to be stable in the future.
What do you do, sort of where you live, that sort of goes along with that mantra?
Sure. So in Leeds, where I live, there are several local sort of sustainability cooperatives. There's a housing cooperative that got some traction in the news. There are various local markets where you can get stuff that's much more locally grown than the kind of stuff that's shipped in. Really, the stuff that I do in my locality can be done in any locality, and I can take it with me when I go. For example, I try not to consume those products that take the biggest amount of carbon and methane out of our environment, I put it into the environment. So I tend to stick on things like a whole foods, plant-based diet. That's not for everybody. Some people can't do that for medical reasons, but I know that I can do that. I try not to drive that much. And recently, I've reached out to sort of local activist organizations there as well who get together and sort of share ideas. So it's almost the interfacing with other organizations that already exist to try and just present the ideas. Since we try not to be an institution ourselves, there is a very small Leeds chapter of the Zeitgeist Movement, but that's really it's not really relevant, because if you can infuse into the local community the ideas of resilience and sustainability and of sort of science literacy and the growing understanding of the world's real issues, rather than the idea that we have somehow once again voted for the wrong people, then you're sort of most of the way there. You don't need to tag it with sort of the Zeitgeist Movement thing. Other things that I've done, we co-authored a book that came out this year called The Zeitgeist Movement Defined, that has now been #1 in a couple of different areas in Amazon, which of course is not really, again, a local thing, but is something that I've done. And I plan in the next couple of months to try and do some public speaking up north as well. The north has a rich history of social protest. And that's something that is coming back, actually, again. We've noticed it really in Manchester recently, is that there is an understanding, almost a reawakening of the remembrance that not just localities, but that society is almost having to defend itself against, I don't want to call it the political class, because it's not really a class thing. Political classes behave a certain way because of the underlying values. But you always have to defend life systems, as I could call them, the systems of health, the systems of energy, the systems of things like movement and information, against encroaching systems of economic demand. Always. It's never really gone away. And so for that reason, we find a decent kind of resonance with the north of England. Corporate power has only become more and more entrenched and more systematized over time. I'll give you an example that sort of, I think, underlines your point before I answer it. A friend of mine wrote to me the other day. We'd been speaking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This, if your listeners and viewers don't know it, I think is unlikely given the fact they're watching TruthLoader, is an overreaching trans-state, transnational set of agreements about trade, regardless of sovereignty of nations. And this allows, for example, Philip Morris to take the Australian state to court for trying to introduce plain packaging on its cigarettes to discourage the use of cigarette use amongst its population. Now, the head of, I think, marketing, or one of the senior vice presidents, wrote into The Economist, this would have been about a week ago, to say that actually it's not correct that under the sort of this particular type of partnership that they're seeking damages, but that they're seeking a, quote, natural forum in which to seek recompense for the agreements of sort of, the free market, as they call it. Now, Philip Morris deal in addictive products. There's nothing free about the choices that customers are making there. All bets are off when you're dealing about addiction, whether it's to do with those kinds of products, or whether it's to do with food, which is calibrated with sugar, fat, and salt to addict you. And in fact, the people who owned things like Lunchables are a cigarette company. They bought into the food industry through a back door back in the 90s, when cigarettes were waning as an agreed form of income, or as a sort of an agreed acceptable within the zeitgeist sort of product. So you're absolutely right. I mean, you get this sort of snake of corporate power happening everywhere. And to some degree, the way to fight back does lie within our hands. I mean, the existence of things like WikiLeaks will allow you to read that Trans-Pacific Partnership that was, up until WikiLeaks existed, something that was beyond the ability for the human race to read. It was very much a secrecy built. So some of this is going to be defeated by things like cryptography and by hacking, by pure leaking of information from corporate malfeasance that was not possible before. And that has the effect of both, I suppose, in the short term, educating the population in a way that you never could do before. It was utterly off the table. It was by design a secret. And in the long term, I think, and the middle term as well, correct corporate behaviors as well. You are seeing this as well. I'm not a huge fan of them, but I think they do good stuff. Things like Avaz and 38 Degrees and people like that who sort of organize online petitions to stop, for example, the implementation of damaging neonicotinoids that murder the bee population, for example. Something that, again, because we didn't have that social forum, could not have been done without having to petition the government and hope that your voices are louder than the bribery that's called lobbying would be from the pharmaceutical companies. So there is some ability there to fight back. The other one is, I mean, because of the same structure, you can have things like boycotts as well. But you see, you can do all this boycotting, you can do all this petitioning, you can do all of this leaking and all of this kind of cryptography. It only gets you half the way there. You still require an educated population that is able to use its critical faculties to be able to discern what is an advert, what is a press release, what is a news item, and what really is science, for example, which is extremely tricky for a lot of people to do who haven't had the relevant training. They just trust news sources. The BBC does this all the time. They release things that are essentially press releases dressed up as articles. Usually have a question in the title, by the way. It's the way you can tell. And when they're not doing that, they're hiding the fact that the Green Party are not allowed to be in the running for the 2015 election debates, which is almost a sort of an a priori deselection of certain types of choices. Even if you still put a value in voting, you would think that that is a ridiculous idea. So you still do need those critical faculties. You still do need education, which to a lot of people feels like, quote, doing nothing because you want to have people on the street. And again, standard social protest as well. There are a lot of my friends who do this very, very well, attend a lot of protests, make themselves very visible. Hong Kong's doing it with their occupation, although that's slightly different because that's to do with their democratic process. Occupy in London and New York and around the world was a big wake-up call, has produced a lot of stuff. There are people now writing academic articles within, proper peer-reviewed published literature that are talking about the fact that the present model as it is very much in competition with an emerging model that's very hard to stop, that is to do more with networking, more to do with sustainability, actual sustainability, rather than sustaining the business practices as we have them, which is the basis of greenwashing, by the way. So you still have to do a lot of a mixture of these things. It's a lot of different approaches. There's no one thing you can do. And the more imaginative you can be, the more disruptive you can be, the more interesting it's going to be. So the first thing you have to do is educate yourself. There are a great many reading materials that we not just produce, but actually recommend from other third parties that have nothing to do particularly with our cause. This could be anything to do with things like structural violence, find out what that is. Find out how to read a scientific paper. There is a good piece on that called How to Read a Paper. There are great numbers of reading lists that the Zeitgeist Movement curates. That's the first thing. I would really recommend going for the basic stuff. Now, in terms of the physically, what can I do? There are a couple of very imaginative things. You could get onto FreeCycle and start, instead of throwing the stuff in the tip that you no longer want, actually give it away to people who need it. Or try and get your new items from that. FreeCycle has multiple different forums online around the world. They're very, very big. Secondly, instead of you can start buying local and discriminating quite deliberately where to buy your things. Be very careful. Have a look at things like packaging. If you can get fresh vegetables without buying packaging, why not do that? If you can get it grown from a local farm, even better. Get a bike. I drive far too much in my job, which is why I've radically tried to change my carbon output elsewhere as well. And so you can do those kinds of things as well, getting a bike. Start attending local council meetings and start asking for this stuff to be put on the ballot. One of our chaps in New Zealand, Richard Osmaston, his name is, he actually got resource-based economy on the ballot where he lives. Now, it didn't get voted in, but it got there, and it helped to sort of spread some of the information. If you feel you want to be part of the Zeitgeist Movement and actually form a chapter in an area where there isn't one, do that as well. We have a chapters portal that can do that. You don't have to. You could be an independent actor. That's the beauty of this, is it really doesn't rely on anything but a sort of a holographic representation of what we talk about and trying to make it enacted locally. If you have an allotment, start growing food. If you do not exercise, start exercising. You can do this for free. It's one of the best free things you can do. Every time I see someone jogging or biking, I always think to myself, there's somebody who's alleviating the burden of healthcare costs on the economy. Isn't that nice of them? You can, for example, instead of buying books, use things like book crossing, that is sort of recycling of books around the world. We use more paper than ever, and I'm equally guilty as anybody else. You could switch to ebooks as well, but then you've got to be very careful that you're not getting a load of electronics that have a huge footprint as well. You could, if you have the money or the inclination, maybe switch to an electric car. They're only new, they're quite expensive, but the nice thing is that the energy used for them now actually does come from sustainable wind and they're just bringing in wave as well now, but it's mostly wind when we're talking ecotricity. So that stuff is there ready to go as well. Again, you have to balance up the pros and cons, but certainly we have to get away from our hydrocarbon economy. One way to do that is to either inform yourself about things, or if you can be a consumer of it, to adopt those things as well. And lastly, you can actually spend your time talking to people about this stuff if you find it interesting, if you find it compelling. If you don't, you need to ask yourself why, and take in more than just the news items that you see, and really try and balance out what you see, and try and form a worldview based on this, and educate yourself and other people about science as well. I think that would be probably the most important ways of doing that. If everybody did that, or even if 20 or 30% of the population did that, we would be a tremendous way ahead. Localization is the big one, certainly, along with, I would say, a decreased reliance on things like international imports. By the way, just to underline again how much of a predicament we're in, if you do imagine a significant portion of people now implementing 3D printing at home. If anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about still, it's a sort of a large box that can produce three-dimensional objects. You can produce really quite amazing things, toys, replacement parts for household furniture, items that you would normally order thoughtlessly off a catalog online, maybe Amazon or something, and have shipped halfway around the world because it was cheaper to produce elsewhere. If everybody started adopting this and started, mixing what we call capital goods, the idea that the goods that can function to produce goods that would have normally been sold, with consumer goods, the things that they're actually producing. If everybody did that, that would actually be a radical destabilization of the world economy, because we would start importing much, much less from each other. And if Steven Pinker's argument is to be believed, that one of the reasons that we have such a long peace of 65 years now, is because it's more beneficial to trade with each other. You have to ask yourself the logical question: what happens when we don't have to trade with each other anymore? What happens when we become much more self-reliant, much more networked, the ability to download schemata for very complex items that you can engineer in your own front room without having to order them off various other people? That destabilizes the world. That threatens, under his logic, the auspices of a new war. Is that the kind of economy you want, where increased resilience and increased localization and decreased pollution somehow yields destabilization of political power? That's an interesting question. That's one you have to answer. And I think it really is a short way of understanding the problems that we face, and the fact that the resolution to those problems have to be not sort of fundamentally fought through some nation state or simply by boycotting a corporation. It really is a fundamental change in human action.